The Galactic Council chamber was silent as death when Elder Chirin walked to the speaking platform, and every eye in that massive room turned to watch the small insectoid ambassador move forward on trembling legs. Chirin's species, the Veluxi, stood barely 4 feet tall, and their bodies were covered in soft blue shells that made them look fragile and weak in a galaxy that respected only strength and power. The council chamber held representatives from over 200 species, and most of them had already decided what they would say before Chirin even opened their mouth to speak. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Chirin began, their voice thin and shaking with fear. I come before you today to beg for the survival of my people. For the Dominion hegemony has declared our world scheduled for resource extraction, and they plan to remove us from existence within 1 standard year. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, but they were not murmurs of sympathy or concern. The Dominion hegemony controlled over 300 star systems, and their military fleet numbered in the tens of thousands. And no one in that chamber wanted to make enemies with such a powerful force over a species as small and unimportant as the Veluxi. The Dominion claims our world is inefficient, Chirin continued, their antennae drooping with despair. They say we do not produce enough resources to justify our continued existence, and they have given us 1 year to evacuate before they begin their operations. And where would your people go? Asked the Rithan ambassador, a tall reptilian creature who looked down at Chirin with cold eyes. We have nowhere to go, Chirin admitted. Our biology requires the specific atmosphere of our homeworld, and we cannot survive long-term on any other planet that we know of. So, evacuation means slow death for my people, instead of quick death. The chamber fell silent again. And in that silence was the answer that everyone already knew, but no one wanted to say out loud. No one would help the Veluxi, because helping them meant fighting the Dominion. And the Dominion was too strong and too ruthless for anyone to challenge. I am sorry. Elder Chirin, said High Counselor Morthax, the ancient being who led the council meetings. But the Galactic Council cannot intervene in territorial disputes between member species and non-member entities. And the Dominion hegemony is not bound by our laws or treaties. Chirin's legs nearly gave out beneath them, and tears that looked like drops of amber began to fall from their large compound eyes. Please, Chirin whispered. We are a peaceful people, and we have harmed no one. And we only wish to live on the world where our ancestors lived for 10,000 generations. No one spoke, and no one moved. And the silence in that chamber was the sound of a death sentence being delivered without words. Then a chair scraped against the floor at the far end of the chamber, and every head turned to see who dared to break the terrible quiet. Captain Unipark stood up from the human delegation seats. And she was a small woman with black hair tied back in a simple style, and eyes that held something fierce and unbreakable within them. The humans wish to speak, she announced, and her voice carried across the chamber with surprising strength. High Counselor Morthax waved one of his many appendages in a gesture of permission, though his expression showed that he expected nothing important from the young species that had only joined galactic society 2 centuries ago. Elder Chirin, Captain Park said, and she walked down toward the speaking platform with steps that were calm and measured. 200 years ago, a human colony ship called the Wandering Hope suffered a catastrophic failure in deep space, and the vessel drifted for weeks with failing life support while 3,000 humans slowly began to die. Chirin looked up at the human woman with confusion in their eyes, not understanding why she was telling this story at such a moment. That ship drifted into Veluxi space. Captain Park continued, and your people found it, and instead of ignoring it or taking its resources, your people saved every single human on board. The chamber grew very quiet again. But this was a different kind of quiet. Your ships brought air and food and medicine, Captain Park said. Your doctors worked for weeks to heal our sick and wounded. And your people asked for nothing in return. Not payment, not treaties, not political favors. Nothing at all. Elder Chiron's antennae rose slightly as memories from long ago began to surface in their ancient mind. I remember that ship, Chiron said softly. I was young then, barely an adult, and I helped carry the human children to our medical stations because they were so small and so scared. Captain Park smiled. And it was a smile that held warmth, but also something else. Something that made several ambassadors in the chamber feel suddenly uncomfortable. We know, Captain Park said. We have records of every Veluxi who helped our people that day. And we have passed those records down through every generation since then. And we have taught our children and our children's children about the kindness that your people showed. US when we were helpless and dying. That was 200 years ago, said the Dominion observer from his seat in the upper gallery, his voice dripping with contempt. And you humans are still a minor species with barely 50 ships in your fleet. So what exactly do you think you can do about our legitimate territorial claims? Captain Park turned to look up at the Dominion observer, and her smile did not waver even slightly. We are going to help the Veluxi, she said simply. Laughter erupted from several sections of the chamber, and the Dominion observer's mocking voice rose above it all. You will sacrifice your pathetic little fleet for a species you barely know? He asked with cruel amusement. That is not loyalty, human. That is stupidity beyond measure. Captain Park waited for the laughter to die down. And when she spoke again, her voice was quiet, but somehow it reached every corner of that vast chamber. Earthlings never forget loyalty, she said, and we return it in ways that others cannot imagine. So I suggest you tell your commanders to prepare themselves, because humanity pays its debts. She turned and walked back to her seat, leaving behind a chamber full of confused and amused aliens who thought they had just witnessed a foolish gesture from an insignificant species. Only, Elder Chiron watched the human woman with different eyes. Eyes that held the smallest spark of something that had died in their heart just minutes ago. That spark was called hope. And though Chiron did not yet understand why, they felt that the galaxy had just witnessed something far more significant than anyone realized. 200 years ago, the stars had looked cold and distant through the cracked viewport of the wandering Hope, and young Chiron had pressed their face against the glass of their rescue shuttle to stare at the dying human vessel. The ship was massive by Veluxi standards, a great metal beast that hung motionless in the void with sections of its hull torn open, its lights flickering like the final heartbeats of a wounded animal. There are life signs inside, the Veluxi captain had announced. Over 3,000 of them, but they are fading fast. Young Chiron had felt fear because their people were not warriors and they had no weapons. And no one knew what these strange new aliens might do if the Veluxi approached their crippled ship. We should contact the authorities and wait for instructions, one of the officers had suggested, but the captain had shaken their head and made a decision that would echo through 2 centuries of galactic history. They will be dead before any instructions arrive, the captain had said. We help them now or we let them die, and I will not let them die. The Veluxi had worked through 3 days and 3 nights without rest, cutting through damaged airlocks and carrying unconscious humans to safety and pumping oxygen into sections of the ship where families huddled together waiting for death young. Chiron had found them in a small storage compartment, a human woman holding 2 small children against her chest while she whispered words of comfort in a language that Chiron could not understand. The children had been so small, even smaller than Chiron, and their faces had been pale from lack of oxygen, and their lips had been turning blue. Chiron had not hesitated, not even for a second, because those children needed help and Chiron could give it. And nothing else mattered in that moment. Come with me, Chirin had said through their translator device. "I will take you somewhere safe." The human woman had looked at Chirin with eyes full of fear and desperate hope. And she had placed her children into Chirin's arms. Without a word, Chirin had carried those children to the medical station. And when the Veluxi doctors had no food that humans could eat, Chirin had given them their own ration, because hungry was better than dead. The woman's name was Soying Park, and she was the great-grandmother of Captain Unipark now. 200 years later, Admiral Doyoung Kang stood before the assembled commanders of the human defense force in a chamber buried deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon. And his face was grim, but his eyes burned with determined fire. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the room with absolute authority. "For 2 centuries, we've told the galaxy that we are a minor species with limited resources and a small fleet of barely 50 combat vessels." He pressed a button on his control panel, and the holographic display behind him came to life with images that made several officers gasp out loud. "We lied." Admiral Kang said simply. The display showed shipyards, hidden in asteroid fields, and construction facilities buried in the clouds of gas giants and training bases on frozen moons that no one had ever thought to scan. "Our true fleet numbers over 4,000 combat vessels," Admiral Kang continued. "We have carriers and battleships and destroyers that no alien eye has ever seen. And we have been building them in secret since the day we understood how dangerous this galaxy truly is." Lieutenant Minji Seo stepped forward from her position near the wall, and in her hands she held a data tablet that contained the most ambitious military operation in human history. "The Dominion believes we are weak," she said. "They believe we have no chance against their fleet of 500 ships. And that arrogance is going to be their greatest weakness." She activated her tablet, and the holographic display changed to show tactical formations and jump coordinates and timing sequences that had been planned down to the second. "We are not going to simply fight the Dominion," Lieutenant Iseo explained. "We are going to expose them, because the galaxy thinks the Dominion is powerful but civilized, and we are going to show everyone what they truly are." Admiral Kang nodded and turned to face his officers with an expression that held no doubt and no hesitation. "I know what I am asking of you," he said. "I am asking you to risk your lives and the lives of your crews for a species that most of you have never met, for a debt that was created 200 years before most of you were born." He paused and looked around the room at the faces of men and women who had trained their entire lives for a moment exactly like this one. "But that is what it means to be human." Admiral Kang said, "We do not forget those who helped us. We do not abandon those who showed us kindness. And we do not measure our loyalty by what is practical or what is safe." One by one, the commanders in that room stood at attention, and not a single voice was raised in objection or doubt. "The Veluxi saved 3,000 of our people when they could have simply flown away," Admiral Kang said. "They gave us food from their own mouths and air from their own ships, and they asked for nothing in return." He looked at Captain Unipark, who stood near the front of the assembly with her hands clasped behind her back and her eyes fixed on the display showing the Veluxi. "Homeworld, now 3 billion Veluxi are going to die unless we act," Admiral Kang said, "and I do not know about the rest of the galaxy, but I know what humans do when someone who saved us needs saving in return." The response came from every throat in that chamber. A single word spoken with absolute conviction: "We fight." Far across the galaxy, in a small dwelling on the Veluxi homeworld, Elder Chirin sat alone in the darkness and waited for the end that seemed inevitable and inescapable. Then their communication device activated with an incoming transmission from a source they did not recognize. And when Chirin answered it, they saw the face of Captain Unipark looking back at them. "Elder Chirin," Captain Park said, "my great-grandmother told me stories about you, About a young Veluxi who carried two scared human children to safety and gave them food when there was none. Chiron's antennae trembled as tears began to form in their ancient eyes. That was so long ago. Chiron whispered, "I never thought anyone remembered." Captain Park smiled, and her smile held 200 years of gratitude and loyalty, an unbreakable promise. "We remember everything," she said, "and we are coming, Elder Chiron. So tell your people to hold on just a little longer, because humanity is coming, and we are bringing 4,000 reasons why the Dominion should have left you alone." Chiron wept then, not from despair, but from something else entirely, because hope had returned to their heart, and this time it burned brighter than any star in the sky. The Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metal predators. 500 warships arranged in perfect formation above the soft blue world, where 3 billion Veluxi waited to die. Commander Thrax stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked down at the planet with the cold satisfaction of a hunter who had cornered helpless prey. "Begin scanning for any signs of resistance," he ordered, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who had destroyed entire civilizations without losing a single night of sleep. "Commander," one of his officers reported, "we are detecting no military vessels in orbit, and the planetary defense systems appear to be minimal at best." Thrax let out a sound that might have been laughter if it had contained any warmth or joy. "Of course, there is no resistance," he said. "The Veluxi are a weak species with no allies and no hope. And today, they will learn what happens to those who cannot defend themselves in this galaxy." He raised his hand to give the order that would begin the bombardment. But before his fingers could complete the gesture, an alarm began to sound across the bridge. "Commander!" an officer shouted with sudden fear in their voice. "We are detecting multiple hyperspace signatures, hundreds of them, and they are emerging all around us." The space around the Dominion fleet suddenly exploded with light as ship after ship materialized from hyperspace. Not just military vessels, but civilian transports, and cargo haulers and medical ships marked with bright symbols that identified them as non-combatants. "Commander." Thrax stared at the tactical display with genuine confusion, as the number of human ships continued to climb higher and higher. "What is this madness?" he demanded. "Count them. How many ships are there?" The officer's voice trembled as they reported the impossible numbers. "Over 4,000 combat vessels, Commander, and another 2,000 support ships. And they are still arriving." Captain Una Park's face appeared on the main view screen of the Dominion flagship, and she smiled with an expression that held no fear and no hesitation. "Commander Thrax," she said calmly, "I believe we have some things to discuss." Thrax recovered from his shock quickly because he had not risen to command by being easily intimidated, and he forced his voice to remain steady as he responded. "You humans have made a terrible mistake," he said. "Even with your hidden fleet, you cannot defeat the Dominion. And now you have revealed your true strength for nothing." "Perhaps," Captain Park replied. "But we did not come here simply to fight you, Commander. We came here to show the galaxy what you really are." Thrax noticed then that the human fleet had not opened fire, and among the military vessels he could see ships bearing the markings of news organizations and diplomatic observers from dozens of neutral species. "You brought journalists to a battle?" Thrax asked with disbelief. "We brought witnesses," Captain Park corrected him. "The entire galaxy is watching this moment live, Commander. Every species in the Galactic Council and beyond is seeing what happens here today, on the Veluxi homeworld below." Elder Chiron stood in a crowded plaza surrounded by thousands of their people who watched the sky with hope and terror mixed together in their hearts. Giant screens showed the confrontation happening in orbit, and every Veluxi on the planet held their breath as they waited to see what would happen next. "The humans have formed a defensive perimeter around the planet," a Veluxi technician announced. They are not attacking. They are just standing between us and the Dominion. Commander Thrax felt something he had not experienced in many years. Something that felt like uncertainty creeping into his mind. "You cannot stop us forever," he said to Captain Park. "You can only delay the inevitable. And when your supplies run out or your crews grow tired, we will simply push through your pathetic blockade." Captain Park nodded as if she had expected exactly this response. "You are right," she admitted. "We cannot stop you forever, but we can make sure the galaxy sees everything you do. Every ship you destroy, every life you take, every atrocity you commit." She gestured to someone off-screen. And suddenly, the view screen split to show broadcasts from a dozen different news networks. All of them focused on the standoff above the Veluxy homeworld. Right now, 17 billion beings across the galaxy are watching you, Captain Park said. They are watching the mighty Dominion hegemony prepare to exterminate a peaceful species that never harmed anyone. Thrax felt his jaw tighten with anger because he understood now what the humans were doing. And he hated them for their clever manipulation. "This changes nothing," he growled. "The galaxy respects strength, not sentiment. And no amount of witnesses will stop us from taking what is rightfully ours." "Then take it," Captain Park said. And her voice was suddenly cold as the void between stars. "Open fire on our hospital ships, destroy our civilian transports. Show the galaxy exactly what kind of empire you have built." The bridge of the Dominion flagship fell silent as every officer waited to see what their commander would. Thrax knew he was trapped in a situation with no good options. Because if he attacked, he would prove everything the humans claimed about the Dominion. But if he withdrew, he would show weakness that other species might exploit. "You think you are clever," Thrax said with hatred dripping from every word. "But you have only delayed the inevitable. And when this is over, I will personally ensure that Earth burns for this insult." He turned to his weapons officer and spoke the words that would change everything. "Target the hospital ships first," he commanded. "If they want witnesses, then let the witnesses see what happens to those who stand against the Dominion." The first volley of weapons fire streaked across the void and struck a human medical vessel that had been clearly marked with symbols of healing and peace. And the ship broke apart in a ball of flame that was visible from the planet, below on 17 billion screens across the galaxy. Beings of every species watched in horror as the Dominion fired on unarmed ships filled with doctors and nurses who had come only to help Captain Park, allowed herself one small smile as she watched the galaxy's opinion shift in real time. Because Commander Thrax had just done exactly what she needed him to do. "Admiral Kang," she said quietly into her communicator. "They have shown their true nature, and now it is time to show them ours." The human fleet began to move. And 4,000 warships that had been built in secret and trained in shadow finally revealed why humanity had hidden their strength for so long. They had been waiting for a moment exactly like this one. A moment when loyalty demanded action, and the galaxy needed to see what humans would do for those who had once shown them kindness. The battle for the Veluxy homeworld had begun, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The void above the Veluxy homeworld erupted into chaos as human warships surged forward to meet the Dominion fleet. And the darkness of space was torn apart by weapons fire that painted the stars in colors of destruction and defiance. Admiral Da-Hyun Kang stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the tactical display with eyes that missed nothing. His voice calm and steady as he directed thousands of ships in a dance of death that would determine the fate of an entire species. "Third Fleet, reinforce the left flank," he commanded. "Seventh Fleet, I need you to draw their heavy cruisers away from the planet. And somebody get me a status report on our ground forces." The human ships moved with coordination that the Dominion had never seen before, each vessel working in perfect harmony with those around. And like the cells of a single massive organism, Commander Thrax watched from his flagship as his numerical advantage began to crumble against tactics that seemed almost impossible. How are they doing this? He demanded of his officers. They are outnumbered and outgunned, so why are we losing ships faster than they are? The answer was something that Thrax could not understand because he had never experienced it himself. And that answer was called loyalty. Human ships threw themselves into danger to protect damaged allies. And pilots sacrificed themselves to save their wingmates. And every single crew knew that the people beside them would die before abandoning them on the surface of the Veluxy homeworld. Sergeant Junho Lee led his squad through the burning streets of the capital city toward a target that would change the course of the battle. "Keep moving," he shouted over the sound of explosions. The Dominion landed troops to capture the planetary shield generator, and if they take it down, the fleet can bombard the entire planet. His squad followed him without hesitation. A dozen soldiers who had trained together and fought together and trusted each other with their lives. "Sergeant," one of his soldiers called out, "why are we doing this? Why are we risking everything for aliens we have never even met?" Junho paused for just a moment and looked at the young soldier with eyes that held no doubt or regret. "My great-grandmother was on the Wandering Hope," he said. "She was dying in a dark compartment with no air and no hope until a young Veluxy found her and carried her to safety." He pointed toward the shield generator in the distance, where Dominion troops had already begun their assault. That Veluxy gave her food when there was none. Junho continued. "They saved her life and asked for nothing in return. And now the Veluxy is Elder Chirin, and their people are about to die unless we do something about it." The young soldier nodded slowly as understanding filled their eyes. "So we pay the debt," they said quietly. "We pay the debt," Junho confirmed. "Now let us move." In orbit, the battle had reached its most desperate moment as Dominion reinforcements arrived through hyperspace and threatened to overwhelm the human defensive lines. Admiral Kang studied the tactical display and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "All ships, execute maneuver Omega-7, he ordered. His voice heavy with the weight of what he was asking. Omega-7 was a desperate tactic that required ships to overload their engines and ram directly into enemy formations. And it was designed for situations where victory mattered more than survival. 17 human cruisers broke away from the main fleet and accelerated toward the Dominion reinforcements. Their crews knowing that they would not survive, but also knowing that their sacrifice would create a gap in the enemy lines. Captain Park watched from her position near the planet as those ships plunged into the heart of the Dominion formation, and tears streamed down her face even as her voice remained steady. "All crews honor their sacrifice," she said across the fleet-wide channel. "Push through the gap they have created and finish this fight." The human fleet surged forward with renewed fury, driven by grief and rage and something else that burned even brighter. Then both of those emotions combined. Commander Thrax finally began to feel something like fear as he watched his fleet crumble against enemies who refused to break no matter how much damage they sustained. "This is insanity," he screamed at his officers. "They are throwing away their lives for nothing. What kind of species is this?" On the planet below, Sergeant Lee and his squad reached the shield generator just as the Dominion troops prepared to plant their explosives. What followed was a battle that would become legend among both humans and Veluxy for generations to come. 12 soldiers against nearly 100 enemies. And yet somehow those 12 soldiers held their ground. Junho took a wound to his shoulder and another to his leg. But he did not stop fighting, because stopping meant failure, and failure meant death for billions of innocent people. "Fall back to the generator core," he ordered his remaining soldiers. "We hold here. No matter what, we hold." The Dominion troops pushed forward with overwhelming numbers, And one by one, the human soldiers fell until only Junho remained standing before the generator controls A Dominion. Officer approached him with a weapon raised and a cruel smile on their face. "You have lost." "Human," the officer said, "your sacrifice means nothing." Junho laughed even though it hurt. And his laugh held no fear and no surrender. "Look up," he said. Simply, the Dominion officer turned their eyes toward the sky just in time to see the Dominion fleet breaking apart and retreating in chaos as human ships pursued them across the void. Admiral Kang's voice echoed across every channel as he announced the news that the galaxy had been waiting to hear. "The Dominion fleet is in full retreat," he declared. "The Veluxy homeworld is secure, and humanity has paid its debt." Commander Thrax stood alone on the bridge of his damaged flagship as the survivors of his fleet fled into hyperspace. And his last transmission before retreating was filled with confusion and rage. This was not worth a minor species. He screamed across open channels, "You have made an enemy of the entire Dominion for creatures that mean nothing." Captain Park's response was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy, and her words would be remembered long after the battle itself faded from memory. "To you, they were minor," she said with quiet conviction. "To us, they are family, and humans never abandon their family." On the surface of the Veluxy homeworld, Elder Chiron watched the burning trails of retreating Dominion ships streak across the sky. And for the first time in many months, they allowed themselves to believe that their people might actually survive. The price had been terrible. Thousands of human lives lost in defense of a species that had shown them kindness 2 centuries ago. But the debt had been paid in full, and the message had been delivered to every corner of the galaxy. Humanity remembers, and humanity repays, and those who stand with humans in their darkest hour will never stand alone. 6 months had passed since the battle that saved the Veluxy homeworld, and the scars of war still marked the planet's surface like wounds that were slowly beginning to heal. But among those scars, something remarkable was growing. Human construction crews worked alongside Veluxy builders to raise new structures from the ruins of the old, and human engineers taught Veluxy technicians how to construct defenses that would ensure no enemy could threaten their world again. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity poured resources and personnel into the reconstruction effort, not as conquerors claiming their prize, but as friends helping friends rebuild what had been nearly lost forever. Elder Chiron walked through the streets of the capital city with Captain Unipark at their side, and everywhere they looked, they saw humans and Veluxy working together in harmony. "I do not understand," Chiron said softly as they watched a human doctor treating Veluxy children in a newly built medical center. "We gave your ancestors some food and medicine 200 years ago, but this is so much more than we ever gave you." Captain Park smiled and placed a gentle hand on Chiron's shoulder. "That is exactly why you do not understand," she said. "Because you think of kindness as a transaction, something given and something received in equal measure." She guided Chiron toward a small park where human and Veluxy children played together, their laughter rising into the air like music. "But humans do not measure loyalty that way," Captain Park continued. "To us, loyalty is not about keeping score or calculating debts. It is about remembering who stood with us when we needed help and standing with them forever." Chiron's antennae trembled with emotion as they watched a human child share their food with a Veluxy child without hesitation or thought. "Your species is very strange," Chiron said quietly. "I know," Captain Park replied with a warm laugh. "And I think the galaxy is only beginning to realize how strange we truly are." Across the galaxy, that realization was spreading like ripples in a vast ocean. Galactic Council had been thrown into chaos by the events at the Veluxy homeworld, and ambassadors from dozens of species were suddenly very interested in reviewing their historical records for any instances where they might have helped humanity in the past. Admiral Don Kang stood before the assembled council and spoke words that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. I know what many of you are thinking, he said with a knowing smile. You are searching your archives right now, looking for any moment when your species might have shown kindness to mine. Nervous laughter rippled through the chamber because the Admiral had guessed correctly. Let me save you some time, Admiral Kang continued. Yes, we remember every act of kindness that every species has shown us since we first ventured into the stars. And yes, we consider each of those acts to be a debt that we are honor-bound to repay. He paused and let his gaze sweep across the chamber, meeting the eyes of ambassadors who suddenly looked very thoughtful. But I want to be clear about something, he said. We do not want you to be kind to us because you hope to benefit from our loyalty, because that is not kindness at all, that is investment. And we know the difference. The Rithan ambassador, the same one who had coldly dismissed Elder Chiron's plea 6 months ago, rose from their seat with an expression that might have been shame, and one of those who refused to help when help was needed. They asked, what do humans remember about them? Admiral Kang's expression did not change, but something in his eyes grew slightly colder. We remember them too, he said simply. And while we do not seek revenge or punishment, we also do not forget when others showed us who they truly were in moments of crisis. The message was clear, and every species in that chamber understood it perfectly. Humanity remembered friends, but they also remembered those who had turned away when friendship was needed most on the Veluxy homeworld. A ceremony was being held to dedicate a memorial for the human soldiers who had died in the battle. And beings from across the galaxy had traveled to witness this moment. Sergeant Junho Lee stood at attention despite the cane he now needed to walk, his body scarred but his spirit unbroken. And beside him stood the survivors of his squad who had held the shield generator. Against impossible odds, Elder Chiron approached the memorial with slow and reverent steps. And in their arms they carried a small box made from wood that had grown on the Veluxy homeworld for thousands of years. On behalf of my people, Chiron said in a voice that carried across the gathered crowd, I wish to present this gift to humanity, a gift that is small compared to what you have given us, but one that holds the deepest meaning we can offer. They opened the box to reveal a collection of seeds, each one glowing with soft bioluminescence. These are seeds from the Tree of Memory, Chiron explained. A tree that we plant only to honor those who have touched our hearts so deeply that we never wish to forget them. Captain Park accepted the box with hands that trembled slightly, understanding the profound significance of what she was receiving. Plant these on Earth, Chiron said, and when the trees grow tall, let them remind your descendants that somewhere in the galaxy there is a species that will never forget what humanity did for them. The ceremony continued with speeches and songs and shared tears. But the moment that everyone would remember came at the very end. A young Veluxy child walked forward from the crowd and approached Sergeant Junho Lee with a small bundle of flowers clutched in their tiny hands. Thank you for saving my grandmother, the child said in broken but earnest English. She told me that humans are the best friends anyone could ever have. Junho knelt down despite the pain in his wounded leg and accepted the flowers with a gentle smile. You tell your grandmother something for me, he said softly. Tell her that as long as there are humans in this galaxy, the Veluxy will never stand alone. The child hugged him then. A small alien child embracing a scarred human soldier. And that image was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy, watching from her ship in orbit. Captain Park allowed herself a moment of quiet pride as she thought about what humanity had accomplished. They had revealed their hidden strength, not for conquest or glory, but to save a species that had shown them kindness when kindness was rare and precious, and in doing so, they had sent a message that would echo through the ages. Earthlings never forget loyalty, she whispered to herself. And in a galaxy full of empires built on fear, that makes us the most powerful force of all, because power built on fear can be broken. But bonds built on loyalty only grow stronger with time. And humanity had just shown the galaxy what those bonds truly meant.